A major meeting of the Communist Party of China has wrapped up in Beijing. What was on the agenda and what was accomplished? Hello, I'm Anand Naidu and this is The Heat. The 20th Central Committee of the Communist Party of China has concluded its third plenary session in Beijing and has issued a communique. There was an emphasis on reform and further economic development as China plans for the future and continues to modernize. We begin with this report from Beijing.
The communique released at the third plenum says the overall objectives of deepening reform are to continue improving and developing the socialist system with Chinese characteristics and to modernize China's system and capacity for governance. The communique says a high-standard socialist market economy is a guarantee for Chinese modernization. It says the role of market must be improved. A fairer and more dynamic market environment must be fostered and resource allocation must be made as efficient and productive as possible. The communique says high-quality development is the top priority of comprehensively building a modern socialist country. It urges deepening supply-side structural reform, improving incentive and constraint mechanisms for promoting high-quality development, and creating new drivers and strengths for realizing growth. Describing opening up as a defining feature of Chinese modernization, the communique urges sticking to the basic state policy of opening up and continuing to promote reform through opening up. It states that China should rely on its advantages as an ultra-large market and enhance its capacity for opening up through international cooperation and build a new open economy system at a higher level. The communique says that ensuring and improving people's well-being in the course of pursuing development is a major task of Chinese modernization. It says China will improve the system of basic public services, strengthen efforts to provide inclusive public services, meeting essential needs and ensuring basic living standards. China will also work to solve problems of the greatest, most immediate and most practical concern to the people, constantly meeting people's aspirations for a better life. The communique says Chinese modernization is the modernization of harmony between humanity and nature. It calls for an ecological civilization system, reduced carbon emissions and mitigation of pollution in parallel with expanding green transition and promoting economic growth. And the concept that lucid waters and lush mountains are invaluable assets must be implemented more quickly. The communique emphasizes that Chinese modernization is the modernization of peaceful development. It says China remains firm in pursuing an independent foreign policy of peace. China has promoted the development of community with a shared future and advocated common values of humanity. It will work to implement the Global Development Initiative and Global Security Initiative and Global Civilization Initiative. The nation will advocate an equal and orderly multipolar world and inclusive economic globalization that benefits all. China will actively participate and lead in reforming and developing the global governance system. Li Dongning, CGTN.
There is much to discuss, and joining me now from Beijing is Victor Gao. He is Chair Professor at Soochow University. Also with us is Einar Tangen. He is a Senior Fellow with the Taihe Institute and he's Chairman of Asia Narratives. Joining the discussion too from Boston is Ambassador Jorge Heine. He is a former Chilean ambassador to China. And from Beijing, we are also joined by Zoon Ahmed Khan. She is a Research Fellow at the Center for China and Globalization. Welcome to all of you. Victor, let me start with you. Great to see you. How important was this plenary session of the 20th Central Committee of the Communist Party of China? As I said, a communique was issued at the end of the session. What was your overview on the main themes and takeaways as China looks to the future?
Thank you very much. The 4-day-long third plenum of the 20th Party Congress came and went away with a big bang. Now, it came with at least 6 months, if not 7 or even 8 months delay, and it caused a lot of expectation within China and throughout the world. And the long-delayed third plenum really set up all the expectation, and I think met a lot of expectation, because the final communique clearly declared to the world and to the whole party in China that reform is the dominant theme from now on. They even mentioned there is a 5-year period from 2024 to 2029 when China will celebrate the 100th anniversary of the founding of the People's Republic of China, that all the new tasks and the new assignments for continued reform in the coming 5 years will need to be met. On the other hand, if you read the communique, it is really very philosophical, very political. It really doesn't go into much detail as to what exactly will be the specific actions that will be taken. But it's very philosophical, talking about the reasons behind it. So you hear a lot of reform opening to the outside world, new productive development, new quality productivity, and how to promote the continued implementation of socialism with Chinese characteristics, how to promote inclusive development, and the harmony between human development versus preservation of nature. So I think we really need to wait more for the details of the implementation or the guidelines, which I will believe will be announced in the coming weeks and months to firm up all these very philosophical points that are talked about in the communique. But one thing is absolutely certain, that is, China realizes that China will have no future if not continuing with the reform and opening to the outside world. This is exactly the same spirit as the third plenum in 1978, when China really embarked upon the reform and opening to the outside world. I think this new third plenum wanted to upgrade China's reform and opening to the outside world to a higher level, emphasizing on the new qualitative productivity, meaning breakthroughs in science and technology and innovation, and making sure that the achievements of the economic development will be more shared evenly among the population. Because you remember, 40-something years ago, Deng Xiaoping said China's reform and opening should allow certain groups of people to get rich first, because at that time it was not possible to make sure that everyone in China got rich at the same time. So now we are in a position to make sure that all the people, 1.4 billion Chinese, should not be left behind. All of us should have a chance to see our livelihoods getting improved. And China eventually, either in 2029, 2035, or 2049, will achieve modernization or in all respects in a more inclusive way, more equitable way for all the Chinese people.
Einar Tangen, the 20th Central Committee of the CPC also adopted a resolution of further, quote, deepening reform comprehensively. What does that mean for China's continued modernization as it plans for the next 5 to 10 years?
Well, it goes back to something Victor was referring to, which is high quality development, which simply means that China wants to climb the value chain. It wants to have businesses and industries that have higher margins so it can pay more wages that are also sustainable. To do that, they are pushing these new productive forces. Well, what does that mean? It means the types of things that you already see with Huawei, 5G, 6G, solar, any new electric vehicles, new green energy. There are so many different areas where technology can be developed. It needs help in terms of basic science, but China is determined to create a better society using very specific means, and that is this technology. So yes, the opening up, reform, all of these things point to how China is going to do it. And, you know, there are people out there who will say, well, I didn't hear what I wanted to hear. You know, Xi Jinping made it very clear, this is a people-centered government, and that is going to continue. but they have a very specific plan of how to move the country forward. So many people will be waiting for a lot of the specifics that Victor was referring to.
Ambassador Jorge Heine, this plenum, the outcome of the plenum will, of course, resonate globally as well, because China is the world's second largest economy. China is committing more to foreign trade structural reform. How do you see the potential for expanded trade and economic relations with Latin America?
Well, I will say this. Many eyes around the world have been set on the outcome of the third plenum. There is much at stake, it seems to me, in the resolutions that come out of it. The challenges of the current economic situation in China on the one hand, and the complex geopolitical situation around the world make these decisions particularly important. What are people in Latin America looking for? It seems to me that the notion that has been put forward of the new quality productive forces as basically technological change that will drive the Chinese economy in years to come is a very important notion, as is the idea of the national system that has been put forth by President Xi as a way of channeling resources from all around the country for that purpose. The challenge is, it seems to me, if the relationship with the United States in terms of trade and economic relations deteriorates, that would obviously have an impact on the rest of the world. For example, the price of copper might go down. That is a very significant concern in Chile. So again, the idea that China must do something to give a new impetus to its economy and provide it with the sort of speed and higher growth that it needs is something that the whole world and in Latin America is very much looking at. And again, innovation, new technologies, AI, cloud computing, and nanotechnology, it seems to me, are very much at the core of that.
Zoon, of course, there are countries in the wider Asia region with a very close relationship, economic relationship with China, like Pakistan, for instance, that will be looking very closely at the outcome of this plenum. What is your overview on the plenary session and the communique that I was talking about?
Thank you, Anand, firstly, for having me. I'll have to agree 100% with what your previous panelists, especially Victor, mentioned. This is obviously a very philosophical document, but it is one that the world has been looking forward to. I think, in a nutshell, we can say that yes, the commitment to deepening reform and opening up is certainly there. The commitment to China's, further investment in new quality productive forces, again, modernizing its sectors, working on ascending the value chain, which are also deeply interlinked with China's interactions with the world, including whether we talk about the Belt and Road initiatives, BRICS or SCO. I'll also say that, again, the world is looking for green globalization, greener transitions, and China's, again, commitment in this document, as we see, although, again, we will find out the specifics in the weeks and months to follow, the precise implementation, but the commitment being there is also opening opportunities for many developing countries that are seeking for greener development, greener urbanization. Another very important factor is that I think a lot of countries also look towards China when they're trying to understand how to establish better governance, how to incorporate, some lessons they can learn from China's process of 4 decades plus of reform and opening up. What can they learn in terms of balancing between reaching their economic targets, GDP targets, but also ensuring that this economic transformation that they seek, whether it's under BRI or other domestic agendas, it is also in some way balanced. And I can mention that a lot of countries are trying to understand how exactly China thinks of its 5 and 10-year reforms. How is China interpreting the link between rural and urban modernization? how can, instead of looking at stipends as a way to alleviate poverty,
Right.
we can think of more creative ways to improve the quality and the productivity of our workforce. So there are multiple reasons why the world, especially I would say Asian countries, are keenly observing these developments.
Victor, Zoon mentioned the green globalization, green development, ecological conservation was also addressed at the session, with objectives to improve on carbon cutting and to advance green development. Now, of course, China is already leading the world in terms of green development, in terms of green technology, and as we have seen, China is now the world leader in electric vehicles, the production of vehicles, the technology that's used in those vehicles, as well as the sales of those vehicles. How transformative is this going to be for the global economy as the world fights climate change?
You are raising a very important question. I think if we look at China's record since 2000 in the global context, then it is very, very convincing to say that China always means what it says and says what it means and will do it when it says it. That means when China says, wow, solar is good, it is good in dealing with the consequences of climate change. Now, with a big bang, China is the leading country in terms of R&D and manufacturing installation of solar. Same for the wind. And now we see China is also the leading country in global nuclear civilian power generation, and the targeted and the promised new reactors are the #1 in the world compared with all the other countries combined. Now comes EV, and China firmly believes that EV will eventually replace fuel car, and EV will really help mankind as a whole to better deal with the consequences of carbon emission and climate change. Boom, China goes to the field. There is no oversupply or overcapacity of EV in China. China believes that if we look at the number 2023, China's EV production is only about 1/3 of the total automobile production, which is at about 30 million cars, the largest amount ever achieved by any single country in human history. But China's goal is to further go up from 1/3 to 45%, 50%, 75%, eventually to up to 100%, meaning EV cars should be replaced the totality of the fuel cars produced in China. And if you look at globally, the EV car production as a percentage of the total automobile production is even smaller. So where comes the overcapacity? There is a short undercapacity in EV production. Therefore, China is gearing up every resource in China available, R&D, manufacturing capacities, and also incentives for consumers to buy EV cars to make sure that China will be the first country to complete this transition from fuel car, which China is the largest manufacturing, to fuel car, to EV car, which China leads in the world. This is leadership by examples, leadership by doing the revolution in China itself, which eventually will impact the whole automobile industry throughout the world and mankind as a whole.
Einar, we've also heard a lot about China's commitment to new quality productive forces. That is something that was also mentioned in the communique as well. I mean, how transformative will high tech, including AI, be as China looks to build its economy even further as it looks to the future?
Well, it's very important, but there's two parts to it. One is we're talking about technology and was necessary to move a lot of these industries forward. But there's also constraints within China itself. And Xi Jinping referred to those. He wants to get rid of these. He wants to have a national market. He wants to get rid of these kind of local constraints where they're, in essence, trying to keep business within their cities or provinces. And he says, look, we need a free flow in order for market forces, and this is obviously, competition, to work. And this is what they're counting on. It's not just innovation, but a better working environment. And he's part of this is also, this idea of making sure that your factories and logistics are working at the most efficient level possible. You can go to places like Tangen and other ports, and literally you don't see anybody You see, machines, robots working 24/7. And that is an example of the kind of efficiency that China is looking for. But I wanted to add one thing, if I may, and that is, when you look at this document, there's something very important to note that the party has put a set of goals forward, and maybe people say, oh, it's philosophical, but they're saying that they're going to get this done by a time certain. And that means that they're taking responsibility. So when you start looking at Xi Jinping and saying he's at the core of the party, in essence, what he's saying is, I'm responsible. And how many leaders in the world are putting themselves out there and saying, here's a deadline, here are the things that I believe in, and here are some metrics that you can use to see whether or not I achieved them.
Ambassador Jorge Heine, speaking of technology, of course, China is a driving force in innovation, in the development of advanced technology. And I'm wondering, as Latin America continues to strengthen its ties with China, how can access to this kind of technology that we are seeing coming out of China also help Latin America?
Yes, absolutely. I think you have hit the nail on the head. Latin America desperately needs to move up in the value chain from producing commodities and exporting commodities, which it does now largely, to the next stage with more value added to these products. Now, it so happens that Latin America has many of the key commodities for the green economy. We're talking about copper, we're talking about lithium. These are key elements for the green transition. So it seems to me that what would be very important is for Chinese companies to not just, get hold of those commodities from Latin America and process them in China as they're doing now, but rather also look at joint ventures with Latin American companies in the region and start adding some value to this copper, to this lithium. It seems to me there's an enormous room to move forward. I mean, I'll mention for only one example, electric buses, which are in so desperate need in the region, and which could be built in Latin America using those inputs. So it seems to me the sky is the limit in terms of what can be done there in joining hands between China and Latin America and moving forward in that direction.
Zoon, on the theme of opening up, the CPC also committed to more cooperation under the Belt and Road Initiative. You were talking about that a moment ago. I mean, how important is the BRI to global trade, keeping in mind that, as we've seen in the past, that China has been the main driver of global economic growth?
No, absolutely. I mean, China has been the driver of 30% of global economic growth. And this is something, once again, as Ambassador has also mentioned, countries, whether they're in Latin America or parts of Asia, they see the BRI actually as perhaps in a way, a political commitment to expanding practical cooperation. So whether we talk about, electric vehicles, whether we talk about Chinese technology, even agricultural transformation, technology incorporation in various key sectors of these countries, technology that they do not have currently the capacity to build, but with growing populations, with growing economic challenges, with growing food security challenges, these sectors need to be developed and modernized. And so the BRI essentially, whether we look at on the regional levels, for instance, FOCAC or the China Central Asia Cooperation or bilateral cooperations, it's really a set of commitments over the last 10 plus years where both the Chinese government and partner governments are coming together and trying to figure out what can be further done, So I'll give another interesting example. For a lot of countries, it's really a challenge. It has been over years a challenge to access the Chinese market. But then now you have the China International Import Expo. You have various demonstration areas, whether we talk about Qingdao, Lianyungang, or other parts of China, that are helping facilitate that process of access to the Chinese market. And now when we talk about, technological transformation and renewing, further improving those mechanisms, the BRI is playing a very central role in understanding, deciphering what are the precise demands of developing countries. And secondly, also very importantly, I mentioned this before, but I've mentioned this again, that for these countries, it is also a challenge to figure out what are the proper steps forward.
Right.
What should their 5-10-year plans look like? What kind of development is appropriate for them at this stage? So I would say this commitment coming from China, not only to promote global economic, openness in the global economy, more equity, equality in the global systems, and then on a bilateral or multilateral level taking this up is effective and much needed.
Right. Victor, China is a wealthy country with the ability to invest abroad, but at the same time, it also attracts a lot of inbound investment that comes into the country. I mean, how much of an increasing role do you see China play in international financial engagement?
I think China will be playing a critical and the most important role in the years and decades coming forward. Several reasons. One is, as you mentioned, Chinese money going out to invest in all countries involved, in especially BRI and other frameworks. And secondly, serving as a magnet to attract money from other parts of the world. In more recent years, you hear a lot about Middle Eastern money, for example, and also China's continued push for the internationalization of the renminbi, especially the digital renminbi, will really be revolutionary in terms of international trade, payment and settlement, etc. Eventually, if you look at the trajectory, the Chinese way of promoting financial integration with the rest of the world will make international payment and settlement easier and not being used as a political tool, for example. So the international settlement and payment reform will make it more as a international public good, rather than as an instrument which can be wielded by a certain country against other countries. And this will be crucially important for the future of international financial reform.
I know, I've just got a minute left. The IMF recently raised China's economic growth forecast for 2024 to 5%. You know, looking at that number at a time when we see increasing global instability, I mean, how important is a stable Chinese economy, not just for China, but for the world?
Well, absolutely. There are a lot of headwinds out there. I mean, you have conflicts in Gaza, in Ukraine, and there are many others around the world which are being ignored. You can go to the DRC in Africa. There are other areas. We still have the issue with the Rohingya. Things in the Middle East are not exclusive to Gaza. Yemen and other places still have issues. So at this point, it's very important for at least one responsible stakeholder to say, here's a path forward for everybody where we don't get into conflict. And that's exactly what China's trying to do.
Okay, and that's where we have to leave it. Thanks to all of you for being with us. And that is it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Arlen Naidu in Washington, D.C.